All right, so now we should have a really good idea of what our fiduciary duties are that a agent must provide to a client. We went over those in the last video here. But you know, what about if it's dual agency? And remember, dual agency is if you're representing both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Obviously, that requires a lot of disclosure, right? Got to have written agreement by both parties to be able to represent both parties. But part of that disclosure requirement is you got to let both parties know that with dual agency will come limited limited duties that you would have to provide to each party. Now, both parties will get the exact same amount of representation. It's just that it will be somewhat limited, meaning buyer and seller, you may have to take a little more responsibility for yourselves. Because remember, there are 6 fiduciary duties, right? And of those 6, half of those become limited. Okay? Now, and for test purposes, you need to know which duties are limited. And the duties limited, you see there in the square, but obedience, loyalty, and disclosure. Right? Obedience obviously is limited. Buyer, you can't ask me or tell me to do something that's going to hurt the seller, or vice versa. My loyalty obviously is now split between the two of you. You both get the same amount, but it's going to be limited. And I'm going to be limited on how much I can disclose to either party. If I'm talking to the buyer, I may know what the seller or how low the seller's willing to go or willing to accept, but buyer, I can't disclose that to you. Or on the other side of it, maybe if I'm talking to the seller, I may know the buyer's willing to pay much more than their initial offer, but seller, I can't tell you that. So in essence, I can't do anything for one party that's going to hurt the other party. So that's why those 3 duties are limited when you're involved with dual agency. Now the other 3, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable care, due diligence, those you continue to provide in full with dual agency. But yeah, I would remember, certainly for test purposes, the 3 duties that are limited if you're going to be practicing dual agency. Okay? Now, what we're going to look at now, what are the obligations the principal owes back to the agent? Okay? We know what the agent owes the principal. Again, remember, principal could be the buyer or the seller, just whoever you're working with. But what does that principal owe back to the agent? And that's what we're going to look at right now. And we start with compensation. Obviously, buyer or seller, you have to compensate the agent based on whatever was agreed upon, right? If you agreed to pay them, you got to pay them. Now, there's this thing called procuring calls. And there's a good chance you could certainly get questions about what is procuring calls. First of all, if procuring calls is an issue, that means basically you have 2 agents in a dispute over who's supposed to get what commission, okay? Who's supposed to get paid what commission. And typically, whoever can show or prove that they are the procuring cause of the sale, then they're the ones that will go to closing and obviously get paid the commission. So what are we talking about? How could that work? Is it possible a buyer sign an agency relationship, or sign an agency agreement to create an agency relationship with an agent, and then that same buyer, a few days later, signs another buyer or agency agreement with another agent? So now you've got basically 2 agents that are saying, that's my client, no, that's my client, and so forth. Well, how do we know who's going to get paid the commission? That's the question here. And whichever one can show or prove they're the procuring cause, obviously they're the one going to get paid. So what does it take to be procuring cause? Well, obviously you have to have a written agency agreement to represent that party. If you don't have the written agreement to represent them, then you have no case whatsoever. All right. But then you got to take it a step further. But in addition to the written agreement, they have to have actually showed the buyer the house they're buying, helped write up the offer, negotiated the deal, got the offer accepted without any break in that chain of events. Okay? That's key. There cannot be any break in that chain of events. So say you had agent A, they signed an agreement with agent A, and agent A may have very well showed them the house. But then a couple days later, that same buyer signs another buyer's agreement with another agent, or we'll say agent B. Agent B takes them back to look at that exact same house, and now they're convinced they want to go ahead and make an offer. So agent B helps them put the offer together, negotiates the deal, and the seller accepts the offer. Well, then who is the procuring cause? A or B? Obviously it's B. Because first of all, the moment that buyer signed another agreement and went and looked at the house with another agent, that broke the agent A's chain of events and started a new chain of events. So B went all the way through the process without any break in that chain of events. So B would be procuring cause, and obviously would be going to closing, and accepting and getting paid the commission. But now what about A? What about agent A? Are they due a commission? Certainly. If that buyer signed a contract with them, then that's what they're talking about here. Then buyer, you owe both. Basically, the buyer's now liable for two commissions to two different agents. And the agents are not going to be splitting the commission. You now signed an agreement with two different agents. Buyer, you're now liable for two full commissions. The only issue is which agent is going to go to closing and pick up their check from the closing table. And that's going to be whichever one can show they were procuring cause of the sale, which was B. But agent A, they're still entitled to the commission. But unless the buyer just agrees to write them a check for it, which good luck that happening, then the agent may have to consider, if they want to press the issue, then the only option you got is maybe go to court and have the court order them to pay the commission. I'm not suggesting you should do that. I'm not saying that would be a good idea at all, but legally you would certainly be entitled to that commission, okay, because they signed the contract. All right, so we know compensation is one obligation. Reimbursement is another obligation. So what does that mean? So say I list a house for sale, and I'm just making up numbers right now, but say I spent $1,000 marketing this property, doing all the things I need to do to get it ready to sell, marketed, all the advertisements in place, and I spent $1,000 trying to get all this done. And then let's say I had a 6-month listing with the seller and it just didn't sell, which by the way, that's going to happen. You're not going to sell every single property you list for all kinds of reasons. Now I'll tell you, you don't want that to happen often, okay? If you're listing houses and they just don't sell, you're going to run into some problems here. But occasionally it's going to happen, okay? It's just life. But let's say it doesn't sell. So the seller decides to list their house again, but with a different agent. Y'all, I'm telling you, they have every right to do that. Y'all, you had your shot. You had 6 months to sell it and it didn't sell. Now they're going to give another agent a shot. Well, is the first agent entitled to be reimbursed for that $1,000 that they spent trying to market the property and actually get it sold? Are they entitled to reimbursement? No. Y'all, that is not what they're talking about here. Where this, first of all, if it just doesn't sell, then that's on you. Y'all, that is not the seller's fault at all. They gave you the opportunity to sell it. You didn't sell it. So now they're giving somebody else a shot. But what they're referring to here is, say you list a house, you spend this $1,000 in marketing, and then the seller just changes their mind, which I will tell you, it happens. Where they'll just come out, you know what, Frankie, we thank you, we appreciate everything you've done up to this point, but me and the spouse have been talking, and we've just decided we're not moving. We're just going to stay where we are and be happy here. So in other words, they're asking to take the house off the market. Now look, if they decide they don't want to sell, you cannot force them to sell. Okay? If they want it off the market, you got to take it off the market. But now under those circumstances, seller, now that is your fault. Now I done spent $1,000 marketing this property. Now you have to reimburse me whatever my expenses were up to this point. Now that's what they're referring to when they say reimbursement. But you're only entitled to reimbursement if it was agreed upon in the listing agreement. In other words, you better put in the listing agreement, I'm going to do this and it's going to cost this amount. I'm going to do this and it's going to cost this amount. Y'all, basically you got to have an itemized list here, just letting the seller know that these are expenses that I will be incurring, and if you decide not to sell, then seller, you're agreeing to reimburse me for these expenses. And then they have to do that. But if you didn't list it in the listing agreement exactly what you're going to do not expect to be reimbursed unless the seller is just very generous. Okay, they could, obviously they can, but there's no way you can force them to if they decide not to. All right. The next obligation they owe the agent is opportunity. And I think that primarily is dealing with the seller, I guess, for the most part. Obviously, it could be buyer or seller. But I think the seller's the one that, believe it or not, they'll sit there and tell you how bad they want to get the house sold. But yet, it seems like they're always doing something or saying something to hinder the sale. They're preventing you with the opportunity to sell. And there could be all kinds of examples there, but that they might say, well, all right, Frankie, I want you to list the house, but I don't want any lockbox on my house. Now, obviously, if they say I don't want a lockbox, then there will be no lockbox. Well, what is a lockbox? That's just a little what we use mostly today. It's an electronic box. Really, it hangs on the doorknob of the front door. You can actually put the key to the house in the lockbox, and then agents that have access to the lockbox, they can put the little code in, and they'll open up, get the key, and then you can open the door and show it to buyers. Well, some sellers may say, I don't want a lockbox. Well, I will tell you that can be a problem. You need to understand that going in. That could cut down on your opportunity to sell here. Because basically what that means is if they're refusing a lockbox, every time an agent wants to show that house to a buyer, that means if you're the listing agent, you're going to have to meet them there, open up the door yourself, and basically sit in the car and wait for them to get through looking. And then once they leave, then you got to lock everything back up again, and then you can take off. And then you get almost back to the office, wherever you're going, then you get a call from another agent. They got a buyer wanting to see the house. I got to go back over there again, open it up. Y'all, this can be a real pain in the rear, to say the least. So that's something you'll have to decide on whether you will agree or not. Now, if the seller says, I don't want a lot box, I refuse to have a lot box, obviously you can't make them have it, but could you say, well, then, you know what, I can't I don't have the time to meet them here. I'm not willing to meet all agents here. So therefore, I'm just going to have to step away and not list the house. Y'all, could you do that? You could. Y'all, that's a decision you're going to have to make. But y'all, so just you better be thinking about this kind of stuff before you just agree to what all the seller's demands. Because I'm going to tell you, some of these demands, y'all, it could put you in a position to where you basically have little to no opportunity at all to sell the house. Y'all, they may say, I don't want a for sale sign in the yard. Y'all, some areas, neighborhoods, they won't allow for sale signs in the yard. Now, if it's me, as long as nobody's allowed to have a sign in the yard, then you know what? We're all on equal footing, and I'll live with it. But if there are other houses in the neighborhood that have for sale signs in the yard, and then my seller's saying, I don't want a for sale sign in the yard, I will tell you that will be an issue for me. Y'all, I just know from over the years, y'all, that sign represents probably close to 40% of my business. I get a lot of business from my sign being out there. And now you're telling me I can't even put my sign in the yard? Probably not going to do it. So just all I'm saying is just be careful what you agree to, okay? Otherwise, you could get stuck with something and you're so hamstrung, you're so tied up, you can't sell the property, all right? Next thing they say, excuse me, next thing they owe us is good conduct. Now, you wouldn't think this would be an issue, especially amongst adults, but it is. It's a serious issue, quite frankly. And it's probably more so of an issue with buyers than sellers. But y'all, here's something you really need to understand, okay? And I don't think many people are thinking about what I'm about to go over when we're looking at houses and whatnot. And quite frankly, I don't think many agents are thinking about this, and this is what's really alarming to me. The agents are not even thinking this way. But you got to understand something. Y'all, just because a house is for sale, and obviously the homeowner has to allow you in, or typically will allow you to come in. It's hard to get somebody to buy something they've never seen, although it happens, but it's not very common. You got to understand, buyer and or buyer's agent, you're not just looking at a house. You're not just walking into a house to look at it. You're actually going to be inside somebody else's home. This is their private space that they've allowed you in to take a look at it. You got to be respectful when you're in someone else's home. This is not just a commodity, which is, I'm afraid, a lot of buyer agents and the buyer think, well, it's just another house, no big deal. No, it's not. Y'all, it's somebody else's home. It's their personal space that you're basically invading. You have to be respectful, right? There are things you just don't do in somebody else's home. You don't go looking through all their dresser drawers, for crying out loud. There's a laundry list of things that I could go over here. But for time's sake, I'm not, because I think it's hopefully, it's self-explanatory. But y'all, another really good example that really irritates a lot of homeowners, and I don't blame them, is when buyers and or buyer agents, y'all say it's a hot day during the summer, that walk inside and they just decide they see the thermostat and they go turn the air conditioner on wide open. And then leave it that way. And then when the seller comes home after work, they're it's like they're walking into a cooler. One, that's very irritating. Two, it's expensive to drive your to put the air conditioner wide open like that, or if it's cold outside, you turn the heat wide open. Y'all, don't touch the thermos. This is not your house. Now, once you close, you can do anything you want to do with that thermostat. But up until then, it's not yours, and you're in someone else's personal space. Y'all, just be respectful, right? Y'all make sure we're exercising good conduct when we're out there looking at and showing houses. The next thing the principal owes us is indemnity. Now, y'all, this can be a big deal right here, and you better make sure your clients understand this. And I basically explain it to them this way. You know, whether it be buyer or seller, I'll just tell them. If there's anything you don't understand, anything you need, anything you want, contact me. Let me handle whatever or anything that needs to be handled. I ask you not to do it yourself. Let me handle it. Let me handle it. That's what you're paying me for. Well, at the end of the day, if your client decides to go out there and do something on their own or make phone calls on their own, initiating conversations that they probably should not be having with the other party or whatever, there's nothing I can do about it. It's not illegal for them to do it. It's just more times than not, this is not going to turn out well. But what it's saying here is this. I'm asking you to let me handle whatever it needs to be handled. Okay? But if you go out there and do something on your own and then find yourself in a mess, just understand, buyer or seller, you're the one in a mess, not me. And you can't blame me for something you did. That's indemnity. Okay? And I highly recommend you make sure they understand that. You get a loose cannon out there for a client, and they're out there doing stuff on their own, and you don't know about it, and there could be all kind of problems very quickly. And then the last obligation the principal owes to the agent is good faith. Now, I will tell you that's almost entirely on the buyer, from my experience. But buyer, if you're telling me that you're going to buy a house, then buy one, like now. But I'm telling you, you better check your buyers out thoroughly before you agree to start working with them, driving them around, looking at a bunch of houses. Because just because people say they want to buy a house, number one, does not actually mean they want to buy a house, believe it or not. Two, it certainly doesn't mean they may be able or capable of buying a house. So you need to vet that buyer. Okay? First of all, if you're telling me that you're interested in buying a house, I say, well, awesome. When are you looking at buying? And a lot of times what you might hear, well, right now, where I'm at right now, I've got a lease in place, but it will be expiring in 9 months. So I'm going to need a place to live in 9 months. I said, okay, well, how about in 7 months, come back and talk to me? That's too far out. Now, even if we found the house you want, you can't buy it, assuming you can't get out of the lease. And I will tell you something you better be very careful of. I say very careful. You better not do this. You better not ever recommend or suggest or say anything that they might think you're suggesting that they need to try to get out of the lease. That's a no-no. First of all, you're practicing law. And if you're not an attorney, that's illegal. You're giving them legal advice, and your suggestion is they need to try to cancel or terminate a contract. That's a no-no. So if they tell you they have a lease in place, you better just stop right there and say, well, look, there's nothing we can do right now. You got several months left. Even if we found the house you liked, there's nothing you can do about it. So anyway, just be careful with stuff like that. But then also make sure you talk to their lender. Can they even get a loan for the property, for a property? So you need to find out what their financial capability will be, right? Because I will tell you, a lot of them, even though it says here they owe us good faith, they're just not acting in good faith. So you have to exercise some due diligence and make sure that they can do what they're saying they want to do, right? Okay, so there's we've talked about the obligation the agent owes to the client, and then what the client owes back to the agent. Okay,